Hey, what's up guys, it's Nick2. In today's video I'm going to be showing you guys how to absolutely blast in Season 2 with Rogue for not only leveling, but I'll also go over some early endgame build ideas that I have for you guys. But Rogue is like literally just as good as it's ever been, and it will probably have the single best build in the entire game in late game because of poison and damage over time stuff just relatively becoming significantly stronger. And the poison build not only did not get nerfed, but it actually got buffed, and it was already one of the highest damage output builds in the entire game. I believe it will be the single best build in the entire game. So Rogue is a fantastic class to choose, and for leveling, it's an absolute blaster, probably the second fastest class to level up with, and it is personally going to be what I go into the season with. So I'll just show you guys how to level up extremely quickly with Rogue and talk about some of the Vampiric Powers, Legendaries you guys want to look out for, some gear, and also just quickly go over some endgame build ideas that I have for you so you can quickly transition from leveling into a endgame build. Today's video is sponsored by Dungeon Hunter 6, the long-awaited sequel to Dungeon Hunter 5 that has been well worth the wait. Dungeon Hunter 6 is one of the best mobile free-to-play ARPGs that are on the market, with an intricate and exciting hero collection feature that'll keep you hooked. Dungeon Hunter's gameplay is some of the best out there, with super fast-paced hack-and-slash combat and tons of different builds and skills to sink your teeth into as you take on epic boss fights. It's absolutely free to play, and you can download it now by using my link in the description or scanning the QR code on screen if you are on PC. One of the most unique things about Dungeon Hunter 6 is that when you kill bosses, not only do you get to collect loot from them and even fly them, but you can also even summon up to 3 bosses of your choosing onto the battlefield to become members of your own team, where they will follow you and even have special combo skills. You can even shapeshift into these bosses later into the game to experience their full power. There's over 100 uniquely designed bosses to conquer in Dungeon Hunter, and it's by far one of the most interesting mechanics that only exists in this game, which gives it a ton of replayability. On top of that, the game offers a ton of build variety with their in-depth skill trees, and you can even play with guildmates and battle together in real-time guild wars. Dungeon Hunter also has next-level graphics performance, ensuring the best visual and combat experience that is possible on mobile devices. Download the game now for free on both Android and iOS by using my link in the description or scanning the QR code on screen if you are viewing on PC, and you'll get a special starter pack worth $50 containing 10 summoning scrolls, 1 SSR the Demonic Wolf, and 1 accessory pack. You can also use your account to enter the Lucky Spin event for free to win great prizes such as an iPhone 15 Pro Max, a PS5, an Apple Watch, and much more, and the event has already started, so make sure to hop in, and a big thanks to Dungeon Hunter for sponsoring today's video. Rogue is going to be my main, and I'm going to be streaming an absolute ton over on Twitch, so if you guys have any questions or you just want to see how the build is coming along, probably within the first day I'll be in the end game, so feel free to check that out, twitch.tv/Nick2. Also, the entirety of the build will be posted over on my website, so link in the description. It'll be very helpful for you guys to just slap it open on the other monitor so you guys know exactly how to spend each individual skill point and in which order, so you don't really have to think about it. You can just slam in the skill points while leveling. Leveling is going to be extremely fast this time around, so would highly recommend opening that, and I also will have some Vampiric Powers there, and I will also update things. Also, by the time that, sorry for all the alsos, but by the time that you guys are probably finished watching this video or around at level 50, I'll most likely have an endgame build posted. Otherwise, I'll be streaming with an endgame build, so feel free to just come by and ask questions. But subscribe if you haven't already, whatever. We're going to get into the build here. I'm going to start out with the skill points. First off, for our basic skill, we are going to be using Puncture. Puncture is just the best still. They haven't really changed this all that much. The best thing about Puncture is that it has a really fast attack speed, faster attack speed than any of the other basic skills, and it also is going to apply Vulnerable. I'm going to actually mess around with Blade Shift a little bit early on because they change it to where you actually get the 20% movement speed bonus from Blade Shift active immediately. So that seems like it'll be pretty good for like speed leveling, but once you have combo points, or if you want to play with combo points, Puncture is simply just better. And for most people, I think Puncture is a better option because you get the guaranteed vulnerable. So when you're fighting like elites or anything like that, you'll always have vulnerable up, which did get significantly nerfed, but early on to the game, it's still 20% increased damage. So feel free to mess around with Blade Shift, and if you do, just go fundamental. But otherwise, I would recommend most people play Puncture, right? When it comes to our core skill, sorry for you guys that like playing ranged, but Twisting Blades is still by far and away the best core skill. They haven't really changed all that much, or really anything at all, relating to the relative power of the core skills. Twisting Blades is insane, highest damage output, it gives you, cooldown reduction, and it just does a ridiculous amount of damage. Blade Dancer's aspect is still absolutely insane. Not really all that much to say. If you guys want to play other stuff, feel free, but for leveling, Twisting Blades and even in Endgame, I mean, mathematically, it is just by far the strongest rogue skill. So we're going to go into Twisting Blades and then upgrade that with Enhanced Twisting Blades, and then we're going to get it to rank 2. And then now that we have access to Dash and Shadow Step, we're going to take both of these. Rogue's biggest upside is that it has insane mobility, and that pairs very nicely with Twisting Blades. So we want to grab both of these because ideally with this build, we're trying to level up as fast as humanly possible. That is the main point. And having mobility will obviously facilitate that, but also it's really good for getting out of CC with Unstoppable with Shadow Step, and Dash is just insane movement, right? Now that we actually have cooldowns, we're going to spec into Advanced Twisting Blades so we get some cooldown reduction. This is significantly nerfed compared to what it used to be, but with the enemy density buffs going into the game, there being way more enemies that you're actually hitting, this will still be pretty noticeable. If you want some guaranteed crowd control, feel free to go with Improved. I don't really think that it's necessary, but if you feel like enemies are really difficult or something, I guess you could go into that. Not really a big deal. Now we're just going to max out Twisting Blades just to make life easy for us, and then we're actually going to go into Poison Trap. Previously, I would recommend people go into Dark Shroud, mainly just for the movement speed, because when you start out leveling, you're extremely slow. The reason that I don't really recommend this anymore is because the best way to level up is just living in Domhain tunnels and just murdering mobs over and over again. But if you want to go into the open world, farm out some Vampiric Powers, I would recommend Dark Shroud because the movement speed that you get, I mean, 20% at cap is really, really good, and you also get some survivability from it. But because I'm going to be leveling in a dungeon, I'm just going to use Poison Trap. The main reason for Poison Trap is because you can get a 30% chance to reset your imbuement skill cooldown, which isn't insane, but we're going to be using Shadow Imbuement to just absolutely nuke mobs, and without Shadow Imbuement, your clear speed is like pretty bad. So that is the main reason for Poison Trap, but also Poison Trap will give us some crit chance in the form of Concussive and also Trap Mastery, which we will spec into later. It also has the added benefit of knocking down enemies, which I particularly like as well. So we're just going to go Enhance Poison Trap here. 2 points into Weapon Mastery, literally just for extra damage. And then we're going to grab Shadow Imbuement. Right after grabbing Shadow Imbuement, we will grab Countering Poison Trap for the chance to reset the cooldown. The great thing about Shadow Imbuement, I mean, everything is great about Shadow Imbuement. If you've played Rogue, you know how unbelievably insane it is. But one of the best things about it is early on, our energy regen is like absolutely terrible. But because there's so many mobs that we're killing with the Shadow Imbuement, we go into Shadow Crash and then Consuming Shadows. Each time we kill an enemy with any amount of shadow damage, we get 30 energy, which we're going to be doing all the time. So that's extremely strong. Now we're just going to max out Weapon Mastery for a bit of extra damage, and then max out Exploit for even more damage. At this point, I want to go Enhance Shadow Imbuement just for a little bit of extra damage, mainly so we can get blended so enemies become vulnerable whenever Shadow Imbuement explodes. That's pretty good for us. Not anything too insane, but it will help you every once in a while, especially when you're fighting like tanky elites and early on into the game, when you just need some vulnerable that's AoE. I mean, it is still 20% increased damage, which is quite strong. At this point, I'm going to slam 3 points into Innervation just so we have way more energy gen. Our energy should be pretty good at this point because we will have access to Inner Sight most likely around here. Early on, I would recommend playing with combo points. If you want to play with Inner Sight or combo points, it really is entirely up to you. I don't think one is significantly better than the other. Inner Sight is really good when you have a ton of attack speed, but early on into the game, especially if you're playing with a group, you may need the additional damage that combo points gives you, and it also does give you 100% movement speed when you use a Twisting Blades that has 3 combo points. So kind of just feel free to use whatever. Personally, I'm going to play in a group, so I will most likely be playing with combo points. But if I feel like I really, really need the energy and Innervation just plus Consuming Shadow just isn't doing it, I may play with Inner Sight. But the last time that I leveled up, I was mainly using combo points. Now that we grab that, we're going to go into Adrenaline Rush and then 1 point into Haste, and then we're going to get Momentum as our key passive. Momentum is great because it just gives us movement speed, energy regen, and damage reduction right off the rip. Later into the game, Close Quarters Combat is going to be way better. They actually changed it to where it scales based on your overall crowd control damage, which can get up to a 100% multiplicative damage increase, if not much higher than that. Early on into the game, this actually isn't that bad either. The main reason that I wouldn't recommend using it early, even though it does give you 20% attack speed when you pair it with Puncture and Twisting Blades, you just don't have a great way to consistently crowd control. The only way that you're consistently crowd controlling is with Poison Trap knocking down enemies, but it doesn't last that long, and you don't have, the way that it works now is it scales, the damage benefit that you get scales off of how much overall crowd control damage that you have, or damage to crowd controlled enemies. And early on into the game, you're going to have literally none of that stat. So it's not really going to do much for you. And Momentum is just straight up good. And I think the movement speed is going to be really nice for us as well. This will just stack up by default, literally just from playing with Twisting Blades and also using Shadow Step and stuff. Then we're going to just max out Haste. Haste is great just for the movement speed and also the attack speed. I'm mainly using it for the movement speed. You could feel free to swap this off if you wanted to, though, because it really isn't that insane. I just hate being super slow, so I just grab it really early. And then I put 3 points into Trap Mastery because we're already here. This just gives us 12% increase crit chance against vulnerable and crowd-controlled enemies. Enemies are crowd-controlled right when we use Poison Trap because they are knocked down. So 12% crit chance is not bad at all. It's not super insane because they did nerf crit damage quite a lot, but it has a base value of 50%, so that is still a good bit of extra damage for us. Same reason, I'm just going to buff up Precision Imbuement just for a bit of extra crit chance, which does relate to extra damage, and then I'm just going to max out Shadow Imbuement. Not sure if this is really the best way to go, but Shadow Imbuement does do a lot of our damage, and at this point we're going to be leveling up and not having a ton of extra damage overall, so scaling our Shadow Imbuement damage just so we make sure that it actually is killing stuff will probably be pretty good for us. And then I'll just max out Malice for a little bit of extra damage to vulnerable enemies. Still 9% multiplicative, which is still pretty good. So anytime we are fighting a vulnerable enemy, they now take 29% extra damage, which we are making them vulnerable via Blended Shadow Imbuement as well as our Puncture. At this point, you can kind of put the points wherever you want. I'm going to go into Enhanced Shadow Step just so we have 8% additional crit chance whenever we use our Shadow Step. Alternatively, you could also grab Methodical just for the stun. It just depends if you feel like you really need the survivability with that or not. And then I'm going to go 3 points into Sturdy just for a bit of damage reduction. Feel free to take this earlier on. You could take this even before grabbing the points of Shadow Imbuement. It really just depends on if you need the survivability or not. When it comes to Siphoning Strikes, this sucks. They absolutely nerfed the ever-living crap out of it. Just spam your healing potion while leveling up. This is a lucky hit that requires a crit on close enemies. It's just not going to proc very much. If you feel like you really, really, really need the healing, feel free to grab it. Something else I'd like to mention, if you really want movement speed, which I may even grab early on, is Stutter Step, 15% movement speed from critting. Shadow Imbuement does crit quite a lot, so you will end up proccing this with pretty good uptime. And with my last points, I'm just going to go 3 points into Concussive for 12% increased crit chance anytime that we knock down enemies. It's pretty conditional, so that's why I didn't get it earlier. You could feel free to get it prior to getting the Ranks of Shadow Imbuement. I don't really know the math on this. It's not really all that big of a deal to min-max that. And then with our last point, I'm just going to go 2 into Agile. This is okay, just gives us 8% increased dodge chance whenever we use the cooldown, and cooldowns are anything like Dash, Shadow Step, Poison Trap, etc. You could feel free to omit these points and just go into Methodical Shadow Step for the stun. You could go into Trick Attacks if you are applying Daze in some way. You could even go into Enhanced Dash, but I don't really think this is nearly as good as it used to be, because early while leveling we aren't going to have too much crit chance, but we did get a bit here and there. So there's not like a set in stone best way to do it, but I figured I would just give you guys all those different options there. I'll talk about how you guys want to transition this potentially into an endgame version, but first let's talk about just Legendaries and the Vampiric Powers, and then I'll have it timestamp the endgame variation of the build. So when it comes to Legendaries that you guys want to be looking out for, I'm stupid, sorry, I need to find the codex. I would just go out of your way to get the Blade Dancer's aspect very early on. Nothing else is really all that good. See if I can find it. There it is, Blade Dancer's aspect. Just go get this literally immediately and then just slam it on an amulet or something. If you don't have the materials, you can just put it on gloves or something, maybe a ring even. Blade Dancer's aspect is just insane. It'll massively increase the speed at which you're going to be leveling up. So right off the rip, I believe around level 15, I'd recommend going and getting your combo points active, and then right after you get your combo points, just go get Halal's Vigil done, and then you can just make sure that you're dismantling everything that you're picking up pretty much, and then just slam this on an amulet so it has the extra value. Don't put it on a weapon, because weapons you're going to be constantly replacing. You could put it on a bow if you had the materials, because a bow isn't as good as your one-handers or whatever, but it's going to be really expensive to do that. So again, just put it on an amulet. Outside of Blade Dancer's aspect, there's nothing else that's really worth codexing. There's one thing maybe, if you feel like you really are just starved for resource and it's just bothering you, you could go for Ravenous aspect. So anytime you kill an invulnerable enemy, which we're going to be doing all the time with Shadow Imbuement, you just get 50% increased energy regen. Your base energy regen is 8 per second, so increasing this by 50% makes it go to 12 per second, which is actually a pretty noticeable increase, and you can get this pretty early on as well from Codex, but again, imprinting is pretty expensive. Look out for Umbral Rings. I believe these will still be very good. We're going to be applying crowd control in numerous different ways while in Endgame, so make sure to look out for these. If you loot a 4 Umbral, do not imprint, do not extract, or just extract and just keep it in your bags, because they're super, super rare. You could imprint a 1, but it's just likely not worth the materials. When it comes to which things you want to imprint with when you actually get to around level 40 to 50 to do the capstone dungeon, I'd recommend just going defensive stuff, Aspect of Might, and where is it? Aspect of the Protector, not Aspect. Aspect of Disobedience. Aspect of Might and Disobedience are worth imprinting early on if you just want to get the capstone done very early, because there's a lot of survivability. Damage-wise, you don't really need to worry about it too much. You could get like Aspect of Expectant or Edgemaster's Aspect for a bit of extra damage, but again, imprinting is expensive. When it comes to what to look out for on gear, on helmets, you can get ranks 2 Shadow Imbuement, which is pretty good for extra damage. Gloves, you can get ranks 2, I believe I have a Rapid Fire build on right now, I guess. You can get ranks 2 Twisting Blades on your gloves, which is very, very good. There's a massive damage increase there. Outside of that, just try to get boots that have movement speed on them. You can even get a legendary on your boots for double Shadow Step charges, which is pretty good. And then when it comes to your weapons, I would recommend using daggers full stop now. Swords just are not worth it anymore because crit damage is pretty bad. And daggers do give you the added benefit of higher attack speed. So look out for daggers while leveling. And of course, anytime you find a weapon with higher weapon damage, just slam it on, no questions asked, because weapon damage is king while leveling up. Outside of that, just look for pretty normal stuff. Remember that crit damage and vulnerable damage got nerfed pretty heavily, so just look for stuff like damage to close enemies, maybe damage to crowd controlled. Straight up dexterity is very good. I would just recommend avoiding crit damage on your gear, but vulnerable damage is still pretty decent. Outside of that, I really wouldn't worry too much about your gear. When it comes to Vampiric Powers, I'm not 100% sure how we are actually going to be acquiring these, how easy it will be to get them early on, if it is worth farming them. I'm just going to mention a lot of the ones that I think are particularly good that you guys should be looking out for. So the first one that I think is the best one that I think most builds are going to be playing with, and it's particularly insane for Rogue, is Ravenous. You have lucky hit chance to increase your attack speed by 40% of your total movement speed for 6 seconds. Your base movement speed is 100%. So at a baseline, you're getting 40% attack speed from this, and it's a 6-second buff, so it's going to be up all the time. It has a lucky hit component, but you're going to be proccing lucky hits all the time because Twisting Blades has pretty high lucky hit, and you also have insane attack speed, so you're going to be slamming those out. And if you get 200% movement speed, which is really easy to do on Rogue, that's 80% attack speed, and it only costs 3. I don't see a world where you don't use this. That's probably by far the best one. Infection seems like it might end up being pretty good. Really just depends on how this actually ends up working, but feel free to look out for it and use it. Rogues have very high attack speed, and I imagine that it will work with each individual spin or hit of the Blade Dancer's aspect, in which case you could inflict pox on individual enemies very quickly and just do a whole bunch of extra damage for them. That might end up being really insane for Rogue. We'll have to wait and see. A Metamorphosis, I think, is really appealing on Rogue because right now we kind of use Shadow Step only because it's our only unstoppable, but if you could just get unstoppable on your evade for free, not really for free, but that could end up being really good. And there's also a new pair of unique pants that gives you 40% multiplicative damage whenever you are unstoppable, and you could just permanently have unstoppable up as long as you just evade every 4 seconds, right? So that could be insane for damage, and it applies the Vampiric Curse, and they just take extra damage, whichever this physical damage scales off of, so that could be good. Prey on the Weak, I don't really think is going to be great while leveling, but if you happen to get it, I mean, just put it on. Just 16% increased damage to vulnerable. Not really insane. And we are going to be using the exploit glyph later on, so we don't really care about the vulnerable application from this with Vampiric Curses, but still pretty nice. Resilience and Undying are absolutely insane for survivability. Early on to the game, if you can get Undying, this will just make your survivability through the roof. It basically will be siphoning strikes on crack. That'll feel very, very nice for you, especially when you have really high attack speed, just slamming attacks out like crazy. Heals you for 3% each cast, and when you're below 50, it's 6%, so that'll be crazy. And if you need more survivability, Resilience is just an unbelievable amount of damage reduction. I mean, if you're at 1% HP, you get 48% damage reduction. Like, what is that? Sanguine Brace seems like it'll be interesting. You can get Fortify on Rogue. Not really good because you can't scale Fortify with anything, but you get 8% crit chance while you have Fortify up. It's a little bit of damage reduction, but not really too good. Moonrise is just a significantly worse version of Ravenous. If you happen to get it early on, feel free to put it on. It's just 20% attack speed, basically, is functionally how I view it, and a little bit of movement speed. But compared to Ravenous, it's just not even close because it scales basic skill damage, and we don't really care about that. Anticipation, I anticipate will be very good if you are playing Death Trap, which I may actually end up doing. Really depends, and it will scale its damage by how many enemies are afflicted with damage over time effects, such as poison. So that could be very, very good paired with Poison Trap and Death Trap. Have to see how that works. And lastly, we have Flowing Veins, which will segue nicely into how I think you might want to set up an endgame Rogue build. 60% increased damage over time to enemies that are moving or affected by a Vampiric Curse. How this works, we have to wait and see. 60% increased damage over time with poison already being unbelievably broken. I can't even imagine how good this will be. It really just depends if enemies constantly count as moving, or you really need to build into applying a Vampiric Curse, which you would do with I forget where it is, but basically there's like a lucky hit, yeah, a curse touch, lucky hit chance to apply a Vampiric Curse. I hate lucky hit chance to apply something where I want the damage all the time, but it could end up being worth it for like bosses, etc. Just keep a lookout for this if you want to play with poison, which I would recommend playing with poison imbuement when you actually get into later into the end game. When it comes to how you might want to set up the build, so I'll talk about a couple different variations. First off, around level like 40 to 45 is when I'd recommend going and doing the capstone dungeon. If you want to do the capstone dungeon under leveled, I would recommend just swapping out of Shadow Imbuement entirely. Shadow Imbuement is very, very good for under leveled stuff, even because it is a lot of extra damage, but you're just going to need more single target damage, and building into Poison Imbuement is going to be pretty good. Probably go into mix because you don't have too much crit chance. I guess you have a good amount of crit chance with concussive and trap mastery. So go into blended and just max out poison imbuement, and then you could go into deadly venom and then 3 points into debilitating, so enemies deal less damage to you. And that's pretty much all you would need to change to be able to do the capstone dungeon. And that's probably what I personally will do, just so you have more damage against individual enemies that are going to be really, really tanky. Early on into the game, once you finish the capstone dungeon, I would not recommend staying as poison. The reason for this is because poison is not going to have any AoE clear, and you're just going to level up really, really slowly like that. I would recommend just immediately going out of it and going back into Shadow Imbuement and just taking the points out of here. Shadow Imbuement obviously is just insane for the energy generation, and because you can kill enemies very quickly, so they're just going to be blowing up and doing massive AoE for you. Poison Imbuement ends up being insane if we can not only scale its AoE, make it do AoE in some way, which we might be able to do with one unique effect that is new in the game. I guess I can show you guys it real quick. There's this unique ring that makes it seem like you might be able to scale damage over time into an AoE effect, which if you could basically turn Poison Imbuement into Shadow Imbuement plus Poison Imbuement, that would be the most busted thing in the game. So I'll definitely be on the lookout for that, and that might end up being really good. But Poison Imbuement just is not strong until you start getting a lot of the glyphs like Bane that's very good for it, until you start getting the Legendaries for it. So early on, I would stay away from it, but around like 65 to 70, if you need a lot of that single target damage and you start getting all the stuff for Poison, Poison will end up being the best way to set it up. So if I wanted to play with Poison, how would I set it up? I would probably get rid of Poison Trap at this point, and I would just play with Poison Imbuement and Shadow Imbuement because I don't want to lose out on that AoE. Unless, again, that unique effect actually works for turning Poison Beam into a sort of pseudo AoE. Another way to set it up is to swap off of Poison Trap and just go double Shadow with Death Trap as well as Shadow Imbuement, and then may end up even playing Exposure again, just for the lucky hit chance of reducing the cooldown of our Death Trap, and then playing the Anticipation thing. You can even pair that with Aftermath. Death Trap plus Shadow Movement has been a setup that I absolutely love, and you may end up even taking off Shadow Step later into the game if you get that Vampiric Curse where you can dodge and that gives you Unstoppable. If you don't need the Unstoppable from Shadow Step anymore and you can deal with not having that movement, you could play with Shadow Imbuement, Poison Imbuement, and Death Trap, or you could play with just Shadow Imbuement, Death Trap, and Poison Trap to get more value out of Exposure. So that could be a very, very good option for you as well. I'm going to be messing around with all these different options. Sorry if it's a little bit convoluted, but those are the best options that I think that you're going to have for Rogue in the end game, is either just doing literally the exact same build that you did while leveling up in some variation, or building into Poison as well as Shadow Imbuement, or just not playing Poison until you start getting a lot of the good Poison stuff and transitioning into just a double Shadow build with Death Trap, because that is just insane for AoE. Personally, what I am going to plan on doing and what I did the last time while leveling is I just leveled up using pretty much the exact same build that I showed you guys, and then once I got to the capstone, I swapped to Poison, killed the boss, swapped off of Poison, and then I went into Death Trap paired with Exposure, and I just went double Shadow, and I was just nuking the whole screen because I wanted to level up very, very quickly. And that ended up working out very well for me, and I will probably do that, and then around level like 70 or 75, like I said, once I start getting all the stuff for Poison to work, I'll try to mix in Poison, potentially keep Death Trap and mix in Poison just for the like massive single target damage. Or if I feel like I don't need the single target damage, then I'll just keep playing how I have been playing. Hopefully that wasn't too confusing for you guys, but I just wanted to give you as much info as possible. But don't stress too much about it. I will have an endgame build probably by the time that you're done even watching this video, or by the time that you're in endgame itself. So anyways, that's it for the video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys later. Make sure to check me out over on Twitch. Website link will be down in the description. And yeah, subscribe if you haven't already, blah, 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 all that YouTuber cringe stuff. All right, I'll see you guys later. Peace.